Hey everybody, Sean Dotson here with The Flip Side. And today I want to talk about clues, hints, and confirmation bias. So, the 9 clues, we pretty much all know where those 9 clues are. They're obviously found within the poem that Forrest Fenn provided us. And while there's much debate about what the 9 clues are, we all pretty much know where they are. And the hints, we all know, according to Fenn, are contained within, or sprinkled in the stories of the book, The Thrill of the Chase. But what those hints are, is heavily contested. And he calls them subtle clues in the book. He says there are also subtle clues sprinkled in the stories. And subtle is really defined as so precise or delicate as to be difficult to analyze or describe. And that kind of fits the bill, doesn't it? I mean, we all are kind of trying to guess on what we think those hints are. There's no real, certainty in what those are. While we're certain that we know that the 9 clues are contained within just those 166 words within the poem, and even none of us can really come to a consensus on what those 9 clues are. It's even more so with the hints, because they're just scattered amongst there, and we have no real clear indication where, in those stories there are, and we're all kind of guessing on what they are. And that's kind of how confirmation bias really comes into play, because confirmation bias is defined as a tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmations of, existing theories or beliefs. And I mean, we're all, as humans, we're all biased. We all have biases towards things, and our surroundings, where we grew up, who we grew up around, really kinds of help shape those biases throughout our life. Whether we are Democrat or Republican is one, whether we some will, think others are sexist or racist. There are just certain biases that we all kind of grow up with and around and shape our lives. But how does confirmation bias really affect us in this treasure hunt? And my belief in that is it's kind of like when all of us, first hear about this treasure hunt. The first thing we do is we kind of run out there and we grab a copy of the poem and we start reading it. And if you're anything like me, I made some pretty initial naive assumptions about, words and phrases in the poem. Words like brown and why it was capitalized. Phrases like where warm waters halt. Phrases like rich is new and old. And different words and lines in the poem, I started making some pretty initial assessments and assumptions of what I thought those things meant. And then, of course, I just like everybody else, I kind of jumped on the forums and jumped on YouTube and started watching all kind of videos of Fenn and other ones that people had put out there. And I found that a lot of those initial assessments or assumptions that I had made about words and phrases in the poem were kind of being echoed. So it kind of further ingrained those assumptions, and they started turning into confirmations. They started turning into, confirmations of those pre-existing or existing, interpretations and ideas that I came up with about those words and phrases. So it was just that. It was confirmation bias. All this new evidence I was finding on the forums and in the videos and everything else ended up just being, confirmations of those existing ideas that I already had from reading the poem. So that's kind of how confirmation bias works. And I think that's exactly what happens when we try and look for those hints, those subtle hints scattered throughout the book, because they are subtle. They're not easy to find, and none of us, even myself included, can even point to any one of those and say, oh, well, that for sure is a subtle hint, because then that would mean that I know exactly where the treasure chest is, and Like everybody else, I don't have the treasure chest. So how can I know for sure that that is a subtle hint? But our confirmation bias and our belief that of those assumptions that we have made about words and phrases in the poem tend to guide us. So we think that based on our pre-existing beliefs of words and phrases found in the poem that have now been confirmed by everybody else coming up with the same kind of ideas amongst the forums, and those that we would consider veteran searchers have been echoed. So it just further ingrains that. So we're armed with that. We believe we know what those phrases mean. So we go looking through the book, and of course we're going to find, you know, many things that are going to confirm those pre-existing beliefs. You know, again, one of my pre-existing beliefs that kind of got echoed, and I talk about in my Evolution of a Poem Purist, was that Madison Junction had to be where warm waters halt, right? I mean, like I said, it makes common sense. Two geothermally rivers converging there at Madison Junction, becoming the Madison River. And Forrest Fenn, as we all know through the videos in the book, has such a fondness for that area. So again, confirmation bias, you know, it was confirming, you know, it must be right. So, you know, and after I had my, you know, traditional, what I call my traditional trip to the stone, and coming back from that and started realizing that there was just so much noise out there that I just had to focus on the poem. Because if Forrest Fenn, you know, like he says, he tells us all the information that we need to find the treasures found within the poem, then I realized that all I really needed was the information in the poem to find the treasure. And to block out all of that noise, because all of that noise would just lead me down, you know, continuous rabbit holes. So the hints, while I'm not debating that they exist, because Forrest Fenn tells us they exist, that they are so subtle, that they are so difficult to interpret and to even find in there without, you know, my biases telling me that is one, and that's just confirmation bias. So for me, as what I deem now as a poem purist, and what I define as a poem purist, is sticking with just the words in the poem. And for me, that was the best way to remain as objective and to avoid confirmation bias, because there's absolutely no way to avoid it, but you can try and mitigate it as much as possible. And the best way, you know, in my opinion, to do that is to just stick with the words in the poem, and don't try and get overly focused on trying to find the hints in the book, because I believe they can just lead you down way too many rabbit holes. And again, folks, you know, I've said many times before, it matters not how we arrive at the correct solve, only that one of us does. So if you're able to find what you believe to be those hints, and they help you in narrowing down either your general location or confirming what, you know, or helping with what you believe are the correct interpretations of the clues, more power to you. You know, I just believe that, you know, sticking with just the poem is the best way to mitigate as many assumptions and confirmation bias as possible. And that's the way I choose. So I hope that, you know, this video makes sense to you. If it does, I appreciate it if you'd like it. And subscribe if you haven't already. And we will catch you all on the flip side.